Welcome back to Investing Talk Podcast. So today we are going to be diving into Portage Biotech. You sent over some info on them, and it looks like there's a lot to unpack here. So let's get right into it.
Sounds good.
All right. Looks like we've got information on price movements and technical analysis. We got some info on what the company's been up to, and then we also have some stuff on their overall financials and where they stand in the market.
Great.
All right. So let's jump right in. You flagged a pretty dramatic recent price surge for Portage Biotech. I mean, we're talking about an increase of over 100%. The stock is now sitting at around $9.60.
Wow. Yeah, that's something else. I mean, when you see a jump like that, it's definitely an eye catcher.
Definitely. Yeah, one of the sources even mentioned like a 103.82% jump in just one trading day. So what does that kind of a huge move in such a short period of time tell you right off the bat?
Well, I think it points to maybe a few things happening all at once. I mean, it's not just one simple thing that's going to trigger, that kind of a jump. So it makes you think about what's really going on and if it's going to, keep going.
Absolutely. And some of our sources point to a few potential reasons for this surge. The technical analysis actually suggests buy signals coming from both the short and long-term moving averages. It also mentions support levels around $5.09 and $4.58. So looking at this technical picture, does this kind of stuff line up with what you've seen in the past with other companies that are going through something similar?
Yeah. I mean, if you look at, kind of the typical way markets behave, these technical indicators like moving averages, they really can give you a sense of, how investors are feeling about a particular stock. I mean, essentially what they do is kind of smooth out the daily price noise so you can see what the underlying trend is. So when a stock price starts climbing above those averages, especially both the short and the long term, it can signal that there's, kind of a growing positive sentiment, which then, attracts more buyers. And, the support levels that you mentioned, those are also key because, those are the price points where historically you've seen, a lot of buying interest, and that's kind of what prevents, the stock from dropping further.
Right.
But you always have to remember technical analysis is only one piece of the puzzle. You got to look at that alongside what's happening with the company itself, their actual performance.
For sure. For sure. And speaking of the company itself, Portage Biotech is is a clinical stage immuno-oncology company. And they're focusing on therapies that target what are called checkpoint resistance pathways.
Okay.
And they have, a really diverse pipeline of potential treatments that are in development. So what is it about their focus on these first-in-class therapies that jumps out at you?
Well, the thing about checkpoint resistance pathways is they're kind of a major limitation in immunotherapy treatments right now. A lot of times patients just stop responding.
Right.
So if their therapies can somehow overcome that, that could be huge. That would be a significant breakthrough in the field.
We also have some news that they've resumed enrollment in the AD-PORT, a 601 phase 1B clinical trial for their Portage 6 treatment. And this is after they saw some promising early findings. So how important is progress in these clinical trials for a company like Portage Biotech, especially at this stage?
Oh, it's absolutely crucial. I mean, positive data from these early stage trials, it can validate their whole scientific approach. And it often is a big catalyst, for investor interest.
Right.
Because it shows, at least some level of safety and effectiveness. And at this point, that's really what matters. Okay.
All right. So we've also got some regulatory and financial updates to consider here. Portage Biotech, they receive an extension from Nasdaq Q to meet their listing requirements.
Right.
They have until June 9th, 2025. And essentially what they need to do is achieve a minimum shareholders equity of $2.5 million or a market value of listed securities of at least $35 million. We also know that they reported a net loss. So how do you balance these financial aspects with the positive clinical developments?
Well, it's sort of a balancing act, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the progress on the clinical side is really encouraging.
Yeah.
But the Nasdaq Q extension and the net loss, they both point to some financial pressures that are there.
Yeah.
So it's, it's something to keep an eye on.
Yeah. One of the sources also notes that the company is exploring strategic alternatives. So what could that mean and how could it impact the stock?
Well, strategic alternatives is a pretty broad term. It could mean anything from partnerships and collaborations, to help fund their research. Or it could mean a merger or an acquisition to gain more resources.
Hmm.
Or it could even mean restructuring to try to, make things more financially stable.
Mm.
Any of those could have a big effect on the stock price, depending on how the market sees it. Like a good partnership would boost investor confidence,
Yeah.
but a restructuring might signal bigger problems.
Interesting. Okay. So let's zoom out a little bit and look at the bigger picture.
Yeah.
One of the sources that you provided shows that Portage Biotech stock performance over a longer period of time is a little more mixed. They've had a slight increase in the past month, but they've declined over the past 6 months. And they've actually seen a pretty big drop over the past year. So how does this longer-term trend affect how you view this recent surge?
Well, when you see that longer-term decline, it kind of suggests that maybe this recent surge is just a short-term reaction to some news or some technical factors, rather than like a fundamental change in the company's direction. So it's going to be important to see, if this upward momentum can continue and whether it's a real turnaround or just a temporary bump.
So let's dive into the financial health of the company a little bit. There are some red flags that pop up. We see a significant net loss of $75.4 million for the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2024.
Yeah.
There are increasing operating expenses.
Yeah.
They have low cash reserves and a pretty significantly negative return on equity. So for a company in this sector, how worried should we be about these indicators?
Yeah, those are definitely numbers that you need to pay attention to. A net loss that big and a negative return on equity, which basically means they're not making money from the investments that shareholders have made. Those are big red flags.
Right.
And when you add that to the low cash reserves, it's a little concerning. It suggests they could have trouble funding their research and clinical trials, which are really expensive in biotech.
Makes sense.
So yeah, those indicators definitely point to potential challenges for them, unless they can secure more financing.
Now, the sources do point out some strengths, too. They talk about their focus on those innovative immuno-oncology therapies that we talked about before. And they highlight some strategic partnerships, like the one they have with Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. How do these kinds of partnerships usually benefit a company like Portage Biotech?
Well, partnerships like that are great because they bring credibility and expertise. I mean, especially an institution like Memorial Sloan Kettering, that's a big deal. Those collaborations give Portage Biotech access to like cutting-edge research and clinical trial infrastructure.
Okay.
So it can really speed up the development and, getting their therapies out there. Plus, it enhances their reputation, which can help attract investors.
Okay, so overall market sentiment around Portage Biotech seems pretty cautious. There are a lot of concerns about their volatility and their financial health. One source even mentioned some of the public discussion that's happening on platforms like Reddit and X. So when you're doing your analysis, how much weight do you give to this kind of, general market sentiment?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's good to be aware of, kind of the general buzz, especially in a sector that's known for its volatility.
Right.
But you can't base your whole analysis on social media chatter. You got to focus on the company's fundamentals, their actual progress in research and development and their financial stability. Those are the things that matter, not fleeting, Twitter or Reddit discussions.
Okay. All right, so let's talk about the competitive landscape. Some big names come up like Gilead Sciences and Bristol Myers Squibb. These are companies with way more resources. So how does Portage Biotech set itself apart in this kind of environment? And what are some of the advantages or disadvantages of their approach?
I think what sets them apart is their focus on those novel therapies, the first-in-class treatments. That could be a huge advantage if their research is successful. But they are up against these massive companies that have way more money. And that means they might struggle to keep up with the research and clinical trials and marketing.
Right.
That's why those strategic partnerships are so important. They kind of help level the playing field a bit.
So finally, let's talk about what the sources recommend for investors. There are a lot of different perspectives here. Some say hold if you're already invested. Some say be cautious if you're new to the stock and wait for a pullback. One source even calls it a high-risk investment and recommends either holding or selling if you're risk-averse. But they also say that a buy could be considered if the financials stabilize or if there are positive trial results. So given everything we've discussed, what's the key takeaway for you right now?
I mean, for me, the big thing is the potential upside, these innovative therapies they're working on. But you can't ignore the financial risks either. It's a bit of a gamble. This recent surge is interesting, but, I'd want to see if it's backed up by, real improvements in their financials and, more good data from their clinical trials.
So we've covered a lot. We've got the price jump, we've got the technical buy signals, we've
Mhm.
got the clinical trials, we've got the financial worries, and we've got, their long-term performance. So all of that together, it really paints a very complex picture for Portage Biotech. The excitement is there, but the financials and their past performance, definitely suggest we need to be careful.
It's a really good example of, how promising science can bump up against those financial realities. It raises a big question, how do you weigh the potential of new therapies against the financial stability of a company, especially in biotech?
That's a great question. And this analysis really shows how important it is to look at a lot of different things, the technical indicators,
Hmm.
the company's progress, the financials, it's all part of getting a well-rounded perspective.
Hmm.
And hopefully this deep dive has helped, understand what's going on with Portage Biotech a little better. So remember to subscribe, like, and comment if you found this discussion helpful. And let us know if you want to explore other companies or topics in the future.
Absolutely.
All right, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.